Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about first inversion chords. If you think back a few videos, we talked about first inversion triads already. So if you think about it, it was just that the third of the chord was in the bass rather than the root. So if we had a C major chord, C, E, G, then the E would be in the bass instead of the C. That's just what makes it a first inversion. So if you look what we have on the screen in front of you, we have another exciting bass line. Do, sol, do, do, sol, do. Sounds a bit like a timpani part. So let's try and smooth that out a bit so that it sounds a little bit more melodic. And you would usually be given the bass line, but for the purposes of trying to figure out why we would use first inversion chords, we're going to look at it as if we could change it. So let's change this second one to be the B. So we had a G in the bass. That meant that we were looking at a G major chord, G, B, D. So to make that first inversion, we just put the B in the bass. And now we have, instead of do, sol, do, we have do, ti, do, which is a lot smoother and prettier, right? And so let's see, is there another place we can do this? Let's change the C major chord and put the third on the bass here. So now instead of do, sol, do, we have do, ti, do, mi, sol, do. Which has a bit more of a shape to it, which just generally works better. So now let's say that you were given this bass line in a realization exercise. You would see one of two numbers underneath these two first inversion chords. One version you might see is 6-3, and the other is just 6 on its own. So these numbers are called figured bass, and they're telling us just what the intervals above the bass are. So a sixth above the bass would be a G, and a third above the bass would be a D. So this is telling us that there's a sixth and a third above the bass, so G, B, D. Also, 6 and 6-3 are always sort of shorthand for a first inversion chord. So if you see it, you can be, at least for now, you can be pretty sure that you're looking at a first inversion. We use 6 instead of 6-3 because a lot of the time we just assume that the third above the bass is there. And so instead of writing 6-3 tediously everywhere, we might just write, or you might just see 6. So that's what you would see as part of an exercise. Let's see if we can realize this in 4 voices and figure out how these first inversion chords are going to change things. So the first thing that you have to be aware of is that since now that G major chord, if you remember the third of the chord, which is that leading tone, since that's in the bass and we can't double the leading tone, then that B is out for all the rest of the voices. So just be very, very aware of that. The same is not necessarily true for the C major chord, since that's not a tendency tone. However, it's best not to double the third in a first inversion chord because it can become confusing to the ear. So let's put the soprano on C to start with. Okay, so you remember we want to try to go as much stepwise as possible, and we want to try to go in contrary motion with the bass. So we can't go to the B. We've already decided the B is out because it's doubling the leading tone. It would also be parallel octaves with the bass, which would also be terrible. So let's go up to D. So we have contrary motion starting to build a nice shape. And then let's keep going up. We could certainly go back down to C, but then we start to feel like we're just hanging around C and it becomes a little bit static, which, if you remember our melody writing guidelines, is something we want to avoid. Okay, so the bass jumps up to the E. We're going to try and avoid doubling that note. So why don't we come back down? We could have gone up to the G. It's sort of starting to stretch the soprano range though. When you're writing these lines, think about your friends singing them, because we're going to do a lot of singing in class. So if you don't want to stress your friends' voices, or your own voice if you're singing soprano, out at 9 o'clock in the morning, then try not to write too many stratospheric notes. Okay, so we're going in contrary motion with the bass down to the C, and then let's just go in step motion to the B. The B is a tendency tone. It's the leading tone. It needs to go to the C. There's not really another option for us. Okay, let's try the tenor voice now. So last time we decided to put the tenor voice down a little bit lower. Let's start it up here so that the upper voices are in a pretty close position, which means that they'll be as close as they can go. So the tenor will be on E, the alto will be on G, and the soprano will be on C. So if the tenor starts up on E, let's think about where it could go next. So we need a D and a G in this next chord. We can't use the B. So a G would be jumping up and probably stepping on the alto's line. So let's go down to the D, and then let's continue that line so we have some nice contrary motion with the bass and with the soprano. So what we've done here is actually a very good contrapuntal thing. So we've gone down from E, D, C in the tenor, and we've gone up C, D, E in the soprano. It's called a voice exchange. So we've gone C to E in one, E down to C in the other, and it's just nice. It sounds nice, and it avoids parallels. It just works well. Okay, so this next one, a lot of the time when you have a first inversion chord, it's best to try and double whatever you use for the soprano pitch. So in this case that would work well for us, because then we wouldn't have to move anywhere. So let's stay on C. Now we can't double the soprano pitch here because it's a B. We don't want to double the leading tone. So let's go up to the D, and then let's keep going up. So we have sort of a nice wave shape for the tenors. And then the alto line, like I said, we're going to start in a nice closed position on G, and then we need a G for this chord. We definitely need the root of the chord. Something to be very careful of when you're using chords that are not root position is to make sure you include that root. So we'll stick around on G. Oh, it looks like it's going to be another fun alto line. G is the easiest one there. Okay, good job, altos. I just think it's going to make singing your part really easy. Okay, so let's listen to this and see how it sounds. Sounds pretty good, right? It sounds a lot smoother than our last exercise in the preceding video, where we were going 1, 5, 1, and that's in large part due to our use of these first inversion chords in the bass.